This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
On today's episode, we discuss custom lineage, exciting subclasses, and opening the door for the weird, as we begin our deep dive into Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This is the DM Shower Thoughts. Welcome back. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts, the show where we talk about our shower thoughts in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop scenarios, and how to become your best self through gaming. My name is Adamus.
I'm John.
And I'm Ian.
And gentlemen, we're going to kick things off right away. There's this wonderful new publication that has come out called Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This would be I guess like the last one that really did a lot of these groundbreaking things was Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And I love that now we get to jump a little bit further into this and really delve deep into a lot of the UA that we've been analyzing over the many months. And it looks like a ton of things have come to fruition. So we'll take our time on this.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
So just as a quick
like
pre-frame, because so Tasha has her little thoughts and everything in this book, kind of like with Xanathar's and Volo's and Mordenkainen's. But more so than any other publication, Jeremy Crawford has been very open that Tasha as a character very much directly influenced what kind of content that they wanted to put into here. So because Tasha is a interplanar being in that she very frequently travels from plane to plane, we get a much more cosmic look at a lot of the material as opposed to the Xanathar, which was, you got to see how the Xanathar as a character thinks, but the options weren't directly tied to what he's about, Whereas with Tasha's, these are specific, the subclasses are things Tasha would be interested in, and a lot of the spell selection and stuff, the flavor of the spells, the option we're about to kick into with custom origins and everything. Tasha as a character, rather than just being a person to put with the content, was very much directly tied to the content in a much more, for lack of a better term, intimate way than a lot of the other books like it kind of before.
Yeah, whereas I think Xanathar would have these funny little quips, and even Volo would have these funny little things that you'd say. There does seem to be a personality to this book, which I find to be very intriguing. So the depth of exploration here seems, in a way, I was actually reading segments of the mechanical text and expecting a different voice to come out, expecting Tasha's voice to come out from there, which is really interesting. It's clear that there's a scope to this that is interwoven into the grander legacy of D&D. So it follows this character, and I like that. There's a great personality to this that's going to lend itself well to the types and the depth of exploration in the mechanics we're going to explore. So our first thing to hit up, as you first open the book, we start to, chapter 1 is character options, and probably one of the largest bombs in this is the customizing your origin, and there's a lot of layers here. But it really comes down to being able to pick and choose the various bonuses, ability scores, languages, and proficiencies that you begin the game with. And I love that right in the beginning it addresses that a dwarf gets increases their constitution by 2 because dwarf heroes in D&D are often exceptionally tough. However, not all dwarves are like this, and it says it right there in the text that maybe your dwarf is different. And that's okay. That this was made in this way to pursue a certain archetypal idea, and now we can break that. We can change it around.
It harkens back to this high fantasy concept that I would say even predates J.R.R. Tolkien. and the Lord of the Rings sagas, because even in like Norse mythology, if you go back 1,000 years or something, the dwarves were always considered like kind of stocky. They live in the ground. And then you had the elves who were kind of like up on the mountaintops or in the clouds or something in Alfheim. And what's really cool is that even though most elves live in the clouds or whatever, and most dwarves live in the mountains, you can still have a dwarf character who maybe grew up in the city with humans. And so that's what this really represents, is that not every character of a particular race is the same as every other character of a particular race. So it's really nice that you can use your stat bumps, your +1s and +2s to whatever stats you want, so that you can make your character more customizable. And it should be pointed out that I'm pretty sure this was an option the whole time. It's just that the 5th edition Player's Handbook was constructed in a way to make you think that these were the races and how the races look. But I'm pretty sure, generally speaking, you could have just moved those stat bumps however you wanted. There's a difference, however, between the stat bumps and certain racial traits. So, like, Mask of the Wild is kind of, like, very typical Wood Elf. I don't think you can really see a dwarf with Mask of the Wild. But you can definitely have a much more intelligent or charismatic dwarf. So there's no big deal with that. And
if I can just quickly interject.
Oh yeah, sure.
I find it really interesting that this is a great point about the intention of the makers of the game, and then what happened, what was the execution, what we saw in play. I mean, it's the same idea behind when we looked at encounter construction, and then how encounters actually played out, and then how that strained the value of different classes. Where their idea was that there's a line. I should probably find this specific line in the Player's Handbook that says the GM is the absolute is the end result of whatever you're doing, so you can change anything in this book. We gave allowance for that, but still, as a legacy of 3.5 and Pathfinder and all those other areas where the rules are so intricate to how the rules are written, that it became the Player's Handbook was like the deified thing. This is the book. You follow the book. So if dwarves get a +2 con, they always get a +2 con, and that's how it goes, man. Because dwarves are dwarves. And it's interesting because they can say that and have this little line, but by making it an official section, it also brings the people that were into the raw part. Well, now it's raw that this is a thing, even though it was always a thing. It's just, it was more nuanced before, and now it's official. And it kind of brings everybody, it brings us all onto the same page.
Yeah, so and that was like one of the biggest points. One of the reasons, and I say this every time there's a new book that comes out, this is my favorite supplement that's come out, because a lot of times DMs feel like they need official permission in order to make changes to the game that have really, I posted a meme about this recently where it's like, I'm gonna homebrew. It's like, well, that was always allowed. To me, like, Jeremy Crawford has been also very open. This book is a product of love from working directly with the community. That we ask the community, what are things that you do in your games that would help everybody else? So later on, maybe not even in this episode, we'll get to the value of a session 0 and setting hard and soft limits. Like, those are all... that isn't a D&D thing. That is a community thing that has come about because of D&D play. So kind of like how Exandria is now an official D&D world, we're taking a look at what the community is doing well and adding that into the official canon so that, that way DMs feel empowered to run games for their table rather than feeling like they're going to be undercut because it's not like the official rules that have been printed in the book, So it's one of those things where, like, when I started running Gearus like a few months ago, that was one of the first things I did was I said, put your ability score modifiers wherever. And you don't even have to have the same casting stat. So, like, one of my favorite characters in Gearus is Gowron, who is a sorcerer, but he's intelligence based, because for his story, for Clockwork Sorcerer, intelligence makes more sense to be his casting stat than charisma. So if you just look at like Sorcerer, it doesn't break the game to just be like, everywhere where it says use charisma as your casting modifier, make it intelligence. Because it's also a rare save stat. It didn't really break the game or anything like that. So it's always allowed, but also from the designer's perspective, they have to make sure it's balanced for Adventurers League play. So it's why there might be certain, you're like, this option isn't quite what I want as a DM. I want it to be more flexible. But it's because as a home DM, we're thinking of an incredibly specific experience we want to deliver. For Adventurers League, you have to account for very general experiences to try to make as many people happy as you can. So that's why some of the options seem kind of but at the same time, again, they're giving you permission to just do what makes sense for your table.
And I mean, what makes sense for your table? I mean, we've seen in Adventurers League, there's only, you can use like official material or the player's handbook, and then one other book. And then there's all these big limiters, but it's to make a more homogenized and uniform experience for everyone at the table. So there are people that are like saying to this book, I just ignore Tasha's. We just don't use Tasha's. And it's like, come on. But if that's not, if this is opening the box too big for you, you're opening up Pandora's box in your mind, then maybe this book isn't for you. But I think there's a lot of value to delving into it. I don't want people to ignore the book. You can go through the book's options, and then just like at your own table, pick and choose what you want to use. You could choose. I could choose to ignore all of chapter 4. I don't think I will, but I could. And but by going through it, you at least acknowledge that it exists and entertain the possibilities of what this could do. So even when it comes to all of this, I feel like for some people, this is going to break their brains a little bit of what they think D&D is. And they're going to break what they think a dwarf is. And I dare say that's a good thing in 5th edition, which has started to like push those boundaries and open the door to the game to so many people that would have not approached it with the Pathfinder, the Age of Pathfinder, the Age of 3.5, and 4th edition even.
Yeah, well, and to speak to the value a little bit of the opposite, I agree that for the most part, having more options never hurts. And, one of the most memorable experiences I have is like a new DM being like, standard array, no feats, no multi-classing. Do what you can with what you have in the player's handbook. And part of that was like him wanting to like not really get too complicated as he's learning what the other side of the screen looks like. But from a player perspective, it was a really interesting challenge to now be like, you can't just make super hyper optimized everything by having feat chains and, spells from Xanathar's and Tasha's and frost fingers from Ice Maiden. Like it was a really interesting challenge, and it was almost freeing in a way to just be like, just make a half-orc barbarian, go. It simplified the character creation process in a way where there was a lot of fun in that way, and I don't want to discount that either. There might be times where it's more appropriate, or let's say you want to run a generic experience, like you want to see what that would look like, You might also say, we're not going to use Tasha's for this because we're going to try something different, And at the same time, I do agree that a lot of what we call the old guard are getting very upset at some of these options unnecessarily, because it's like, if you don't like it, just don't use it for your table. Like, why do you not liking it have to mean I can't like it? And of course, it's not bad to have a starkly different opinion, because what it does is it offers the opportunity to examine your own values and to just look at it from a different way. And also just learning how not to be super defensive is the other side of it. There's a huge value in letting them speak their mind without you having to judge your perspective of it either. But that's neither here nor there.
There was something that you mentioned there that Adventurers League. I should preface this with that I have no experience with Adventurers League. I've never played in it, never done anything like that. It sounds interesting, but I'm also kind of busy doing all my other stuff as a DM. So yeah, but you mentioned Adventurers League and how it's trying to homogenize an experience so that everyone can have the same one and create like consistent outcomes, I guess would be the answer there. Whereas the home campaigns, sometimes they can be hit or miss. Hello. Um, Sometimes they can be hit or miss, or at least they can have their highs and lows, and then it still averages out if you look at it from a whole, but not everyone might get like close to the same experience, I guess you could say. So I think there's pros and cons to both. You might, in a homebrew campaign, you might have a really great, wonderful experience, like better than you've ever had or something like that, and way better than the Adventurers League could produce, just with their basic rule set there. But at the same time, you might also have like really low like moments where it's like, that didn't turn out quite how I wanted, which might be quote unquote lower than the Adventurers League standard. So just looking at it from like a statistics mindset, how it averages out and stuff, it's interesting to me because in the end, if you look at the big picture, you're still having a good time overall. But there's more. I think there's more room for fluctuation and variability in a homebrew game, which I think is always more fun to me. There was what's up?
Sorry, just before we move on, I did find the passage I think Adam was thinking of. The one thing to note is it is not a defined section. So there's not like a section that says the DM is the final say. It's like a little blurb inside of a bigger section, which is Worlds of Adventure.
Yeah,
where it
it's the spot
says
where a lot of people skip
your
over.
DM might set the campaign on a world or on one that he or she created. Because there is so much diversity among the worlds of D&D, you should check with your DM about any house rules that will affect your play of the game, because ultimately the Dungeon Master is the authority of the campaign and its setting, even if the setting is a published world. And, you know, I do think that in Tasha's, at the very beginning, so under the using this book, it does start with, even before the character creation, it's got to the 10 rules to remember, you know, the first being that the DM adjudicates the rules, that the rules of D&D covers many of the twists and turns that come up in play, but the possibilities are so vast that the rules can't cover everything. So when you encounter something that the rules don't cover, the DM decides how to proceed, aiming for a course that brings the most enjoyment to your whole group. And I love that more because it's not the DM is the final say. Players, you should shut up and listen to the DM. Snap, 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 snap. It's like, no, the DM's job is to produce an experience that will lead to the most amount of enjoyment, you know, even if they adjudicate the rule properly. If it does not lead to the most amount of enjoyment at the table, which sometimes means it's against the players, against the player side, then they're also not doing their job well, you know? So I like how it's a both and. Like the DM has final authority, but also, why are we here? We're not here to just argue about rules and then the DM wins every time. We are here to produce an enjoyable, memorable experience that the DM is the adjudicator of. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was that.
No, that's fine. That's good to point out. I also enjoyed finding that as like the third paragraph in this whole book. So that's definitely a good point to bring out, especially because there's so many comments on like Facebook and Reddit where there are people saying it sounds like you made God mad or something like that because a player is complaining about something that happened to their character in a game that they felt is unfair, which probably was unfair because, you know, like we've always said, you shouldn't have an antagonistic relationship with your DM. But yeah, I think it's important to note that the language matters in this little section here, that they adjudicate the rules. That doesn't mean they set the rules. Like they can. I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying that when you encounter something that the rules don't cover, if you're unsure how to interpret a rule, the DM decides how to proceed, aiming for a course that brings the most enjoyment of the whole group, just like you said. And I think that it's a little... It is, even that is interpretive, because it uses soft language like aiming or unsure, interpret, things like that, that allow you to have like some wiggle room as a DM for how you want to run your games, but it doesn't mean that you are the lord and master of your entire world. Like there's a big misconception, I feel, that comes from the old editions of D&D, where the DM decides everything. Even in some editions, I'm pretty sure the DM rolled for you whenever they asked you.
Yeah, there's some legacies that the DM just rolls for everyone, and he knows all everyone's bonuses, or they just the players were just narrative turnkeys, and then you would roll and tell them what happened.
You can actually trace this, now that you mentioned soft language. You can trace D&D's legacy and the DM-player relationship through a lot of interesting permutations. In original D&D, like the Dungeon Master was really even more of an authority, So, and the antagonistic relationship was something that was expected. That was part of gameplay. So original Tomb of Horrors was Gary Gygax being mean to his players, So, and it wasn't about heroism. It wasn't about telling a great story. It was about, can we outthink each other? Third edition tried to codify every single possibility, which bred the habit of rules lawyering. That's really where rules lawyering came out, is that if we have every rule available, now I, as the player, can call you as the DM out for your lack of knowledge by referencing something official in a book. So the power was taken away from the DM and given to the players because everything was much more codified. And then you get back to 5th edition, where it's like, well, really, the DM should have final say. But now that's starting to go back to the antagonistic thing of the DM is the one, everyone else shuts up when the DM talks because they're most important, And this, I think, is a better rebalancing, which is asking the question, why are we here? We're here to have fun and enjoy ourselves. The DM has their role to play in that. The players have their role to play in that. And really, this is more of a don't gum up the works entry, I feel like. Like, hey, players, when you're the DM, you get to do this, but right now you're not. So they're going to pick a course of action, again, that has the most amount of enjoyment, even if that most amount of enjoyment is asking the players how they want it ruled. How many times does that happen where it's like, I forget how climbing works. Hey, you, like, encyclopedia of the rules. Like, how does climbing work? And then you tell them. And then now as the DM, they get to make a choice. Am I going to go rules as written, or am I going to make a circumstantial ruling, because that will increase the amount of enjoyment at my table?
Yeah, and there is one thing that's pretty interesting. I think we as DM Shower Thoughts have made a pretty cool statement that we're making a shift from the old definition of Dungeon Master to this newer one, where it's more Eastern philosophy inspired, where dungeon masters are showing mastery in the game, in producing the game and creating the setting and stuff, as opposed to being the lord of the dungeon or something like that. And so I think that's a pretty good point to bring up. So the lineage system in Tasha's, it only takes up like a page and a half, 2 pages, and it's a really cool system. It's really good for you if you want to customize your characters in ways that the PHB might not appear to allow initially. You can redistribute your stats, your stat bumps rather. The racial traits are still the same, so don't worry about an elf suddenly having brutal critical or something like that, if that's your concern, or savage critical or something like that. And then additionally, you can even create your own race, which is pretty cool. They set up a little template for you to create your own quote unquote race, even though it's called custom lineage. And they give you some ideas for that. And yeah, it's just a facilitative approach to D&D, I feel, for creative players who want to have a character that expresses their values in the game.
I mean, there's a particular element here that's really interesting that I can see might make some of the old guard angry, but it's also to opens the door to officially address those moments in play where we have a player that has chosen their subclass and chosen their races and their lineage and all that stuff, and they've already done all those decisions, and then they go, that doesn't actually fit with what I wanted to do. And in layman and in homebrew world, we go, okay, that's a respec. Let's take everything and just reshuffle it around, and we can make that choice. But there's an official thing here about changing your subclass, changing your skills. And I especially like that, yeah, well, you're going to stick with your decision for a little bit. Next time you gain a feature in your subclass, you can instead change your subclass as long as you have the GM's permission. So you could be a battle master or be a champion fighter and go, I would like to add in some tactics and tactical decisions into what I'm doing. I don't think the rest of champion is for me, but I'd love to be a battle master. And then you just go boop and switch on over to battle master. I mean, there might be a really cool story thing that we as DMs can add in to create a quest or create a narrative payoff. But then there's a mechanical thing already there in the game that allows that kind of jump over. So in a way, it adds agency to the players. They don't have to feel like they have to have permission to change. They go, oh, it's already worked into the rules. I can make that decision. And then we as a group can create a stronger sense of depth in telling that story. But now there's a mechanical permission for the players to say, oh, it's a part of the game. It isn't just the DM is allowing me to do this. It's there. It's right there in the rules. Cool. It still says you need the GM's permission, which is nice because then we still have a gateway. But I can see where some people would go, but then your choices are, you should lock in your stuff. And it's like, changing your mind is a part of what makes a table more dynamic and accepting and more powerful for including more types of players. As we play, especially when we're newer players, where we don't fully understand all the mechanics of the game, we'll play a class and go, that's not what I wanted, actually. That's not what I thought it was going to be. Or, you know what, I thought I wanted this and I actually want this, and this allows us to change our mind. When it comes to the custom lineage part, to kind of cycle it back just a little bit, I can see where people might go nuts about this and go, well, if you do this, then why would you ever not do this? And the response to that, because I remember whenever we hear these complaints, we addressed this a couple episodes back, that they're like surface level complaints. They're initial reaction, like responses, where people don't go as deep about this when they really start yelling about it. But there's a lot to offer here, and it's not the same as being a tiefling. And it's not the same as the other features you would have present in being, especially the newer, I think, Eberron's version of the orc.
So you're talking specifically the custom lineage sidebar, not the customizing origins rules, right?
Yeah, for this point, yes. Yeah. And it's because I think the thing that I've seen so far is when you use the custom lineage idea, smaller, medium, cool, base walking speed, that's not a big deal. One ability score of your choice increases by 2, and then there isn't another one that increases by 1. So you just get one that increases by 2. And that's a limiter. And then you get a feat. And you gain 1 feat of your choice for which you qualify. And I find that kind of interesting because feats also can offer a 1-point increase to something else. And that's where that other balance is. But if people don't think about that, they'll go 2. Oh, that's not enough. Bleh. And then you get a feat. Oh, that's overpowered. Like, whoa, hang on a second. Like it was already like baked in to create another sense of value. And there's a balance point for you to tell an interesting story. And then you have your variable trait, which will give you like, one of the following options of dark vision or proficiency in a skill. So you kind of trade that off, and then you get languages. And those are starting places. But I could see people that want to try and skew that, but I feel like the feat already makes the right adjustment when it comes to the ability score increase. And I think it allows a larger breadth of choices there than people give it credit for. humans can't have dark vision. Well, what if they're a human that's lived in the Underdark and they've lived underground forever, and so they've sort of adapted to that?
Or
Or
they're
maybe
like
they
an
have a
ape
blind
elf.
sense. I don't know.
That's another big one, is like in The Witcher, Yennefer is a quarter elf, which is why her eyes are purple. So it could just be that you've got a little dwarven blood in you. So you just, your
Just enough.
grandmother on your father's side was a dwarf, so you get dark vision because of a genetic passing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the. I was just gonna say it's the same thing with like being a half orc or something. Like I have a half orc or a quote unquote half orc in my game for Curse of Strahd, but they have like a lineage. I should say they're not a half orc, but they have orcish lineage, and that gives them a couple of orcish traits, even though they're not like a full orc or a half orc. And those traits might not include green skin, for example, which is very typical of half orcs or something. So that I think that's a pretty good thing to bring up, is that D&D. I feel like D&D in 5th edition intentionally does not explore the concepts of like genetics and stuff and how things get passed down heritably. Because I mean, for one thing, it's not really the focus of the game. For another thing, you can make that kind of thing up yourself. It's not a big deal.
And like, for example,
I
in
like that
IO, there is a creature he's a half orc, but he's half orc, half elf. And what does that do to a person, and how does that change what features they have? Now, normally I'd homebrewed what his race was, but we always assume when we have a half elf, the other half is human. We have a half orc, the other half is human. And Green brings up a very good point that in Legacy, we're always about the human-ish characters, and orcs are monsters. So if there's a split, you have like a monstrous side. But now in 5th edition, we're moving a lot more toward heroic orcs and heroic. In a way, we're humanizing. From a player's perspective, we're humanizing all of the monstrous races, and by doing that, there's a lot more opportunities to tell interesting stories. And those stories, what if you had an orc parent and an elf parent? Like in a household setting. Yes, now you have a child who's half of each, and what does that do? And I'd be really curious, because this opens another mechanical door that might start pushing toward those half races,
if there's a mechanical difference, because like it could also just be the Muppets, where like Miss Piggy and Kermit have little pigs and frogs. They're not like weird mutant hybrids.
It's just one or the other.
You have an orc and you got an elf. Some of them are half elves, some of them are half orcs. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of play it, which also includes the hybrid option. So this is a little bit further in the book, but it kind of highlights one of the biggest things that this book brings to the table, which is customizing the appearance of something. So like the example in the book is about customizing spells, and you see that this farmer is firing magic missiles that are shaped like chickens. So the idea is that, one of the things I love about custom lineage is that they're very like open, that you can determine your own appearance. You don't have to go by what the book says. If you want cat eyes, you get cat eyes, because you get to determine this stuff. And then you also get to come up with the story justification to why. You don't have to stick to the book, although just work with your DM so you don't invalidate their world building. I think where a lot of people are getting kind of with Tasha's is because in a way, and it can do this, I'm not saying it's an invalid fear, where because there's so much freedom that's allotted to players, now players can come to the table with weird stuff. And you're just like, I'm trying to run like a low fantasy Witcher style game where it's like dark fantasy, and you're showing up with a Warforged that can shoot laser beams out of its chest. Like, it doesn't fit the world, So, and that comes back to the expectations part. But to me, what Custom Origins does is it actually gets players thinking about racial traits as a package and paying attention to the qualitative values that are going to add personality to your gameplay, right? As opposed to the statistical values, which oftentimes determine success or failure. So I do think that, like, say you want to make a gnome bard, that's now an actual, you can do that now. You could always do it, but it wouldn't be optimized because you wouldn't have any charisma bumps, you know? Like, now gnome bard, you're looking at it in terms of, well, what does gnome give me? Like dark vision, it gives me speak with small beasts or whatever. You're looking, you know, half orc, you're looking at the savage attacks, and you're looking at the relentless endurance. So you're looking more at like the qualities of it. What this does is open up the possibilities so that, you know, if you want to play like a tiefling cleric, you don't have to find a random legacy thing. You're looking at what the race is kind of giving you as a package, and how that can uniquely combine with more and more different class options. So if you build a half-orc wizard, now you might even have like a half-orc blade singer, you know, because you're finding the ways that the qualities kind of line up, as opposed to, well, that's got a +2 strength and a +1 con. And, you know, the other thing that I had never considered was proficiencies. So, like, if you want to build a high elf Eldritch Knight, that actually technically wasn't optimized because the elven weapon proficiencies are going to overlap with the fighter weapon proficiencies. So now if you build a high elf fighter with these rules, in those 4 weapon proficiencies now become 4 tool proficiencies, which is much more useful, and now can have that much more depth for your character, you know? So now, like, maybe they have like a medicine kit proficiency or an herbalism kit proficiency, you know? And with custom lineage, Adam pointed out the big thing here, which is, yes, you only get 1 ability score increased by 2. You can get your second ability score improvement by the feat if you want it, or it's another lever and switch to tinker with, to be like, well, maybe I don't need raw statistics. Maybe I need Polar Master to start with, and I just invest everything in strength. It lets you tell the story that you want to tell much more precisely. And even with changing your subclass, like, to me, I would let my players change their subclass a little more on the fly. Because, for example, like Rogue, you get your 3rd level features, and then you don't get another feature till 9th level. I'm not going to make my players play 6 levels of a class they don't like just because the rules say that's when you should do it, you know? And ultimately, what does it even mean to have a certain subclass? Like, if we're looking at the Battle Master Champion thing, how is that flavored, you know? Yes, the mechanics are very different, but do the stories have to be that different? If you have a champion, it just means you're getting a 19 or 20 on a crit. So so it means you hit hard, you know? Battlemaster, I can knock them down because I hit hard. Is that such a different story that it would break the game by allowing a player to rebuild their character, you know? Now, there are some other, like, more story-intensive subclasses this might come up for. So let's say you switch from being, like, a Celestial Warlock to a Great Old One, you know? And at the same time, is their ability set so different that when they use the previous features, like, that can't be explained by, like, they just don't use that power anymore. How many times has that happened in a TV show we watch where somebody unlocks a new power as they go? Or, you know, wow, why isn't Optimus Prime using that sword arm again throughout the whole movie? That seemed pretty useful when he used it the first time. What? Megatron's right there. He could just go bam right through the chest. Like, it's like, and it's like, why? And, you know, sometimes that happens in stories. We just forget what abilities we have. So, so I really do think that this is overall a positive thing. And, I do think that you should check in with your DM just so that we can all stay on the same page with what we have planned. And I don't think it breaks your story or breaks narrative continuity or anything by changing your subclass.
There are always going to be instances where people are not buying into your world. And there are going to be instances where we have players that are not skilled in bringing a character that is aligned up with your table to the table, or like they're immature in the way that they make their characters. So this is weird stuff with an allowance and a limit. There's a limit to these things that we can do, and there's a mechanical limit. There might be a flavor expansion, and we open a lot more doors this way, but there's a big difference between coming to the table with your custom lineage person with a feat that has cat eyes and dark vision but looks human, and then coming to the table saying, I am part god, and I have already wrestled the dragon lord to the ground, and I fly in on a meteor because I'm awesome. And by the way, I'm immune to all damage because I took this random homebrew thing that was from the internet, and you can't kill me because I resurrect automatically like Doctor Who. Those are different things. Like, there's weird stuff at the table, and then there's people who are immature about how they present their characters and how they build things and when they bring them to the table and go, I said it, so therefore it's real, and I brought this random thing you've never heard of that's not part of any sort of official content, and I made it up, and it's homebrew, and I rolled all 18s for my character. We're not allowing that. Yes, that does happen. I've had people bring it to my tables. In the very beginning, before I started working at our place, I had two separate players that would bring things to the table like that, and they didn't last long. There was the first time it was okay, come on, did you seriously do that? And the second time it was take them aside, you're gone, goodbye. Like, we're not doing that. That was very early on before I started like making standards, but there are horror stories of other GMs that try to run very even tables and try to run like really rewarding experiences for people, and then run the risk of bringing in a new person, and that new person lacking a sense of maturity and buy-in that brings something really weird to the table. But when people start complaining about Tasha's, we're not talking about those people. Like, we're not talking about bringing, I am an ex-angel and I have all these extra powers that make me stronger than God at level 1 because I want to be. Like, that's not what we're doing. There are allowances for customization, and there are very concrete elements here. So when people say it gives you allowance to bring weird stuff, we're not talking about the extreme weird, like the extremely out of the game-breaking allowances. We're talking about, and there's a difference in like when you come to the table. Let me clarify one more thing. When you come to the table with a flavor of, I used to be an angel, but I have these stats and I have these abilities, and then there's a story that we might explore there, or maybe I can march my way back up toward Mount Olympus, or I can connect with those people, and these are flavor elements. It's when people come to the table thinking they have allowance to make something that is mechanically broken and is built in such a way that invalidates the setting, and that the allowance is, well, I can do that because I can do whatever I want now. And that's not what we're doing. That's really important, is that we can open the door for us to tell more interesting stories, and that there's a mechanical backing up to that. And we are not opening the door for someone to rush in with their battle axe, smash your table, and then go, oh, that's just what my character would do. And like, that's not, no, like that. Our basic ideas of how a table works and how this is a cooperative experience still have value and are still valued in the mechanics. And these allowances are really just, Tasha's is a great example of all the stuff we've been talking about over the last 107 episodes of our podcast coming to a fruition. There's an affirmative nature to the discussions that we have had and what we have opened up to our players, but it's all foundational. By opening this book up, it should not create a floodgates open and all the weirdos, quote unquote, now get to flood your tables because they're allowed to. That's not what's happening. So sorry, that was a major tangent right there. But I really wanted to preface that, because when we start diving into these things, I don't think there's anything in this book, at least that I've really delved into so far from a cursory glance, that opens that door, that really opens those floodgates to allow for the the totally imbalanced, rude parts of play to be brought to your table. At the end of the day, and this is true always, really, but at the end of the day, this book and other books have put it into play that the DM is the adjudicator of the rules. They're the adjudicator of the world, and we should buy into that world. Hi, Kitty. And that's perfect.
Yeah, buy in, or at least be clear to the players what world they'll be playing in to let them step out. Because that is another thing is, when you give the DM power like that, and then they don't run a game that you're expecting, that's a breach of trust, So yeah, the DM is the adjudicator of the rules in the world, and still, if you think you're gonna go in with like a silly shenanigan game and it ends up being really dark and serious and people are crying, you're like, oh, this is not at all what I signed up for, like that can be a little bit disheartening, and then especially if you're trying to do something and the DM's like, no, you can't do that because I'm the master of the world, like a lot of times DMing is interesting because you get to really see people's relationship with power, and when they have power, what do they do with it and where does their focus go? Is the focus on them? Is their focus on the players? Is their focus on the game experience? Like what are they bringing to the table? Like a lot of times, literally, like sometimes it's like speakers and stuff. Sometimes it's literally just like a piece of grid paper with pencils. Like, so that is an interesting kind of question to ask. One of the things I also love is that custom lineage is the first thing that we get from Tasha's, and it perfectly segues into the subclasses because the subclasses support the idea of, I don't want to say unusual, but unorthodox, like race-class combos. So a perfect example is this spread here, where we're looking at the Wild Magic Barbarian next to the College of Creation Bard. And usually elf is not thought of as like a barbarian race, Obviously we can make it, but the idea here is that it's like, hey, do you have an elf that would have so much wild magic that would manifest as rage? This is a perfect subclass that would line up for that flavorfully. You could also do something weirder, but this is something that kind of fits. And like Dragonborn tends not to be a bard race, A lot of times when we see Dragonborn, they're fighters or paladins or something like that where they're very physical. And so it's just encouraging that out of the box thinking of this might archetypally be how this race has been presented, but adventures are extraordinary. They're so extraordinary they can break those expectations of what you would normally associate with them. So I just love how most of the subclasses will show some kind like unusual combo or unorthodox combo with mechanics that support it. Like it's supported by flavor and by mechanics by this book. So this theme of customization and this theme of looking at things from a cosmic perspective, it permeates everything.
Really appreciate coming from running a distinct Feywild game, seeing where wild magic is pervasive and an element that everyone sort of experiences. So the wild magic sorcerer is intrinsically connected to wild magic, and we've really set up that these are story beats as well as wild. That having a wild magic barbarian opens the door for an expression inside this setting that normally, and especially like in my Feywild, there's a lot of bestial presence. There's primal spirits. There are primal spirits that move through the world. Some of you are aware I've done a druid circle called the Circle of Fenrir. That's right, Circle of Fenrir, where it is werewolf. It is a werewolf, kind of an adapted moon druid, but a lot of it is the true form is the wolf or the animal that you are, and then your wild shape is your human form. or whatever your other race is, the humanoid. And so to see this as a class feature, optional class feature of the Barbarian, the Path of the Beast, and then to follow it up with the Path of Wild Magic, it has these cool elements that now allow official credence to what I've been building. And is very exciting just personally to me to see them in play. But I love that these expressions are coming out in official ways, because normally I'd have to homebrew this. I'd have to homebrew this brand of expression, depending on my setting and the players who have opted into it. I have a couple of players that have opted into always being aware or allowed to play test my things, because I know that they'll be reflective and respectful of the material. Whereas normally I'd have to do that for this. It's great to see these in play now, and in official play, where we can really delve deep into what this means. So I love there's optional class features that already grant this sort of primal focus. So like the primal knowledge and instinctive pounce. And then when you have the Path of the Beast, you have some measure of shape-shifting, and there's a great pathway here of that primal side. But I love the expression of the wild magic, because it's a different, Path of the Beast is very physical still, but then wild magic approaches, I wouldn't say the intellectual end, but it's the mystical, wild fey almost of that expression. And again, it adds that wonderful and beautiful randomness, a variability of those little bursts. It's still rooted in the strength of the barbarian, so it's not like your entire existence is weird in how it's going to manifest. But there is enough of a randomness that I think it would satisfy, especially those of us that love that part of the game, while still being able to hit hard.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention something about etymology again. I mentioned it like a few episodes back, which is that the word "fey" means things that are like, I guess, like otherworldly, dangerous, things you don't understand. So I actually think that the concept of fey does lend itself very well to barbarian, especially when you consider that the barbarian's rage is it can manifest in so many different ways. Like you can have the zealot barbarian, you can have the the primal path, the beast barbarian, but you can also have other ones like the wild magic one, where it's like it's the rage is coming from something else, something fey. And then you know what, I was thinking of Ancestral Barbarian as well, because that one,
Ancestral Guardians,
yeah, where you're generating your rage from the inherited power of your ancestors, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah. I think that barbarian, interestingly enough, even though it's like a very physical class, lends itself to pretty much any kind of flavor text you want to spin it with, because of how you can intentionally design or redesign the concept of rage as ideas of passion, or instead of just fury.
And then coming from the custom origins, whereas normally you would have a it's a rarity that you would have a gnome barbarian. It's just because the classes, like the ability score increases wouldn't always line up. Now, if you have permission to realign those scores or to make your own custom lineage, now it's, you can feel more confident in what is the story I'm trying to tell. If I want to be a human with cat eyes who can rage with wild magic, then I get to do that, and then you could do maybe I am.
It's because gnomes are considered small, so like you can only go up to like a D8 for like your damage die. So, but if you do a custom lineage, you can choose your size category between small or medium. So you can just use medium, like I'm a big gnome, you can still flavor it as your I'm a small and height wise, yeah. But like you can mechanics wise line up that a little better.
And this is why dwarves were always sort of a little confusing to me, because they were short, but they were medium creatures because they're stocky. So you could just have a stocky gnome, and then you get to be a gnome, and you get to be your barbarian, and you get to make those decisions now. That just makes and that's that small mechanical adjustment, that tiny little small to medium, suddenly opens the door for you to wield your greatsword, your two battle axes, your great axe, to be a barbarian now. And it can still be a novelty, and I want to make sure that's clear, that by making these mechanical choices and the custom lineage to provide a stronger story for yourself, it doesn't remove the novelty of it. You can still exist in a setting where gnome barbarians are rare. If you still want that novelty, it's just that instead of walking into it with more detriments, like mechanical detriments kind of set in stone and stacked against you, instead we've made those adjustments because you're exceptional beings. So you would break the rules of the world, you would break the expectations, like the general expectations. So therefore you shot through that expectation ceiling, and you'll still be that much more of a novelty. So you can still express yourself in that way.
So speaking of expressing ourselves, let's actually get into some of these subclasses. We're not going to go through all of the subclasses or anything like that. We're just going to pick out our favorite subclasses and talk about why we're excited about them. For me, I'm excited. I should preface this. I'm excited about all the subclasses. But if I had to talk about one right now, it would actually be the monastic tradition of Way of Mercy Monk. And the reason for this is because I have been thinking lately about how cool it would be to be able to heal people with your strikes. There's this concept of, if you have -2 to your strength and you just start punching people, then you should be able to heal them because you're dealing negative HP or something like that. And so this is kind of bringing that into a more realistic standpoint, where you actually have good stats, but you can still heal people with your strikes. And so that would be the hand of healing feature for this subclass. But what's really cool about it is, and I'll actually try to show it, is you get a cool mask. And that's really exciting for me, because I've been thinking a lot about masked characters lately, because I think there's a certain air of mystery about them, like what's under the mask, et cetera, et cetera. But it is also much more metaphorical than that. Not just what's under the mask, but what does the mask represent? So in this case, you can choose to have like a plague doctor's mask, which gives you more medicinal connotations as your Way of Mercy monk. But you can also just have a blank mask. You have a crying visage mask. I think that you can choose a mask to suit the kind of personality that your character is bringing to the table. Additionally, I'm really excited for this class because it facilitates using your Hands of Healing without worrying about your key costs all the time. So Monk is really well known for using its Flurry of Blows to do a lot of damage in one round or something. But with this one, you can actually replace some of your unarmed strikes in Flurry of Blows with Hands of Healing without expending the key cost, which I feel like was a problem before. That concerned me when I tried to play this class. Another excited thing about this class is that you get to do necrotic damage on your Hands of Harm strikes, and I think that's really cool, because I plan to multi-class Death Domain Cleric with Way of Mercy Monk, because then you get like extra necrotic stuff that bypasses resistances, and like at higher levels, of course. But it's just really a really cool flavor. That I feel like John talks about sometimes with these subclasses. I feel like it hasn't really been explored in D&D yet, is this concept of being able to give and take healing through your unarmed strikes, as opposed to just casting healing word or cure wounds or something like that, or inflict wounds. It's a really cool idea, and I'm really excited about it.
My favorite subclass in this whole book is Psy Warrior. And the reason is I have a very like open relationship with fighter, in that I think fighter is a lot of times underpowered, and a big part of that has to do with its limited damage types. So like, because it can't give itself magical damage, it can only deal non-magical damage unless the DM gives it some kind of item that allows it to deal magical damage. To me, fighter has always, and I've run games where fighters fall behind paladins and barbarians because it doesn't have the same feature support that those other classes have. And Psi Warrior, psionics has been a thing in all of D&D, where it's always been there, but it's always handled differently. And there's not really there hasn't, I feel anyway, been a good expression where the mechanics are simple enough that they're understood, unique enough that separate them from just magic, and also flavored in a way that makes them exciting to play. And I really do think they did an excellent job with the psionic options in the three subclasses here, particularly with the fighter. We talked about in the UA how like the fighter's psychic strikes or whatever could only do like 1d4 psychic damage, and that never got better. Immediately improved with the psionic power, where you get twice the number of your proficiency bonus number of psionic energy die, meaning you're going to get more and more die, kind of like the Battle Master, that come back on a long rest. They also increase as they're in levels. So 5th level, they're going to go up to a D8, and then at 11th, a D10, and 17th, a D12. Meaning when you're hitting with your psychic strike, you get to expend your psionic energy die, and you can do that once on each of your turns. To me, though, like if you're getting an extra D6 psychic damage on something at 3rd level, that's worth it, you know, especially if it's an enemy that seems to be resistant to your normal damage type. It's at least a way to contribute to give yourself that magical damage, you know. And then a lot of its other features are very specific to this subclass. So, you know, being able to have a protective field or move things telekinetically, it gets me excited to play this class, because now I know if I choose this route for my character's story, it's also going to have a unique mechanical expression that's not going to be outshone by a different class subclass combo. You know, it's something where I'm at there. There's the value in the fact that it's unique, or like Adam put, novel, you know. And it's a fighter subclass that when I read it and I think about building a fighter, that kind of fighter would compete with a paladin, you know, or would compete with a barbarian. So I love how it kind of changed what a fighter should be mechanically. Whereas I think before this book, the fighter had some all right options, but without DM support, could really easily fall off in terms of its effectiveness. And as a player, when you need the DM to let you be effective, you don't feel like you have meaningful choices. You feel like the DM is letting you play with everybody else. And that's just, it doesn't feel right. This feels a lot more right from kind of a design perspective.
For mine, I'm very torn, because there's a lot in here that I'm very excited for. I'm happy to see Spore Druid make its way into another published material, although it was already in Ravnica. That's cool. We've been seeing a lot more of that. But the one that actually is most intriguing to me is a rogue, is the Phantom Rogue, and it has to do a lot with having the relationship with the dead. And not just as in the creatures you've killed. It's there's a distinct, almost like a respect for those that have fallen or that you have felled. And by making that kind of sort of a core feature of the narrative structure of the class, I find that really intriguing, especially running a Shadowfell game and running more games that have characters that want to explore the relationship with the ethereal plane and with the realm of the dead, and when they try to figure out what happened in a space to actually be able to reach out and be affected or to affect the dead. But the other thing that this offers is there's a burst sneak attack that you can use, that it hits one creature and then it can burst to another creature, and that's really interesting. There are tokens that you can take from creatures that die near you, whether by yourself or by another, and then those create little trinkets of like points, essentially, that you can hold on to and then use them to do a variety of different things. Which I find really interesting. But one of them is that you can destroy your soul trinkets, and when you do so, you can ask the spirit associated with the trinket one question. So it's like an adapted speak with dead, but it allows you to be like, I'm going to talk to that guy later, or I want to find out what happens. You have this trinket, this little piece of them, and then you can kind of go kaboom on it and ask them one thing, and it allows you time to like ponder about those elements. And it really is cool because it's an adapted speak with dead. It's another way for you to engage with creatures of the afterlife, and especially those that have that more intimate relationship with you of death. This could be a creature that you killed, and that makes it very interesting to then figure out, well, is it worth it to ask them this question, or do I hold on to the trinket and allow it to give me advantage on death saving throws and con saves, because by holding it I can do that, or do I sacrifice it to answer that one question? And that, I love that there are, for this, we love it when there are classes that have mechanical bonuses and narrative bonuses, and these are interesting choices, because one of those is the mechanical choice: do I hold on to that benefit? The other is, do I destroy it and finally get an answer to this question, or risk not getting a good answer because maybe they didn't know? But that information could be so powerful. And as I run more campaigns where information is so important, this lends a lot of value. I can see the Phantom Rogue really excelling, especially in the worlds that I tend to run. And I I like seeing the kind of the respect of pursuing not just the ethereal plane, but just the relationship of a hero to the dead, and what other interesting stories can be told from there by having that. It's more it's the narrative possibilities that make me excited, more so than the mechanical ones, although I like the mechanical ones. The rogue is already such a wonderful, well executed class that this is like icing on the top of it, that I can see a lot of cool interactions from it, and I'm just excited to see it in play.
Yeah, and there was something you mentioned there about the tokens of the departed. This is definitely not a heroic theme, but it not the feature, but something else that I'm referring to, which is that it reminds me of the Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion and Skyrim. And those are the only ones I've played. I know they existed in the other ones, but what's cool about the Dark Brotherhood is that your soul is basically eternally bound to the Brotherhood. So even when you die, you still can be summoned for work, basically, by the Dark Brotherhood. And this kind of just reminds me of that, because in Oblivion, there's an item you can get where you can, quote-unquote, summon Rufio's ghost to fight for you and do whatever. It's a one-use item. So it just kind of reminded me of this token here, and how... and just reminds me of that death isn't the end for mortals. So... yeah, I just thought I'd bring that up.
Well, and I think it's cool too, because I'm always interested in characters that have some kind of designed conflict within them. You know, you guys are bringing up kind of like evil characters, but what if it's just a good character that's cursed like this? You know, so what interesting storytelling stuff comes there? Like I'm thinking, like, maybe it's like a pickpocket, like an Aladdin figure, and they accidentally touch a relic the wrong way, and the relic curses them with being able to talk to dead people. Like, what does that end up? They end up a little more like Seance from Umbrella Academy, where how do you play out your relationship with that kind of power? You know, it's one of those interesting things where what I like about this book too is encouraging questions like that. Like, you know, if it's a wild magic barbarian, do you like your wild magic, or do you see it as a fey curse that's dangerous? You know, what's your relationship with rage? You know, so a lot of it, I think the themes of a lot of these subclasses are not only providing powerful mechanics and powerful storytelling fodder, but they're like begging to be asked deeper questions that will promote kind of more powerful and enriching role play.
There are so many others in here that I'm just happy to see. I'm glad to see Soul Knife is in here.
Yeah,
It's
Aberrant Mind
Clockwork
Sorcerer.
Magic, I'm glad to see. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I don't feel like there's a single subclass in here that doesn't have an interesting story to tell.
Oh, absolutely. I will say I was disappointed to not see the Psionic Wizard. I was looking forward to that one, mostly because I like all the things that they brought up with it, like becoming kind of like an astral kind of projection where you kind of like turn into your psionic focus. You deal extra damage whenever you cast a psionic spell that does force damage. You deal even more force damage. It was like a whole thing that I really was excited for. Aberrant Mind Sorcerer did not include that extra damage bump, but then again, I guess Aberrant Mind Sorcerer already does a lot of damage, so I probably didn't need to do that.
Psionic Wizard got a lot of negative feedback from the community, just conceptually. So a lot of it's the concepts behind a lot of its mechanics. Jeremy Crawford, like the next day, was like, "So we read the survey results, and that's not making it in." So yeah, R.I.P. Psionic Wizard.
Big sad.
Oh.
Yeah. I can see why as well, though, because the wizard is like all about the various schools of magic, and psionic is not a school of magic, so that might have also made some weird waves there. I do like what they are doing with Tasha's, however, where they are embracing more intelligence-based classes, because as we've talked about before, we know a lot about the nature of magic, but there's always something extra, that extra planar, far realms, entities that work with psychic damage and stuff. That's something that has a lot of space to be explored as to what could be found there and what kind of things happen to people who are exposed to that. Kind of like going a little bit, more scientifically, but kind of like when people are exposed to certain types of radiation. Cosmic radiation is a really powerful radiation. It'll mess up your DNA and stuff like that. And that's why so many comic books explore what radiation damage can do to you and turn you into like a mutant and stuff like that. Like with the Incredible Hulk, I think it was gamma rays for the Incredible Hulk. So, which is like a very powerful mutational, radiation type. So I like the idea of psionics, but I also feel like there's a lot more that I could explore with it and learn about it thanks to this supplement. So I'm excited about that.
Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode of the DM Shower Thoughts. If you want to help support the show, this awesome little show has a Patreon. You can find us at patreon.com/DM Shower Thoughts. And we have tiers ranging from a live chat that is running as we record, which is also the second show that we've been doing that. It's been awesome. To a DM consultation to make the most out of your games, as well as early access to episodes. You get episodes ahead of their public publication, which usually goes out on Podbean every Friday at noon. And this show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network, so feel free to come talk to us over at our community Discord. We are on YouTube, DM Shower Thoughts. We're on Twitch and Twitter and Facebook. And oh boy, all those links in the comments down below, as well as you can come read our words at the GM's Corner over at AdamStrakeProductions.com. We're everywhere. It's going to be great. But thanks so much for tuning in, and please, game responsibly. Bye-bye now.
I strive to defend New Talos and live up to my role as a spiritual leader.
I journey to increase my knowledge of the cusp and cosmos. It has been prophesied that there is destiny in my blood.
I fight for the honor of the name Steadyhand and the great kingdom of Earth.
I wander to find my true place in the world. I will protect my home and family at all costs.
A young ruler's grasp for power threatens an already fractured world. Meet the heroes in Arc 2 of Advantage, a 5th edition D&D audio drama. Find us on all podcast apps.